Here we're going to be learning about something called the text area and getting multiple lines of text on the screen in a proper place. This could represent an end user license agreement. In my example application that I'm trying to get done, it may very well represent the informed consent document for our experiment. It will also be used to represent text of a news flash when something happens in the country that we're generating a budget for. This follows this PowerPoint where we learned how to get things on the screen in the proper place. So in that PowerPoint, we learned how to get this object, which is just a simple text box, on the screen, nicely aligned with the window that's already there. So in this PowerPoint, we'll learn how to get text into one of these things, multiple lines of text, how to get the size measured so that this text area can actually match the text being displayed. We're not going to be talking about having a scrolling area, so we're going to be setting up for a relatively small piece of text that we know will fit comfortably on the screen. This example actually is going to show two different ways of setting up the multiple line text box. We can use this one or this one. This one comes from the original windowing toolkit. This actually stands for Abstract Windows Toolkit. We normally use nowadays this, which was built on top of this. But everything that was in here with Java 1.0 back in the 90s is available here. I'm going to show both of these here, although right now I'm having a little bit more luck with this one than with this one. In setting up the controls, and the text areas, we are going to be following the idea here. We're going to be seeing that there are going to be some special cases, particularly with using the J text area inside of a scroll pane. The first step is this one. And this is the name of the multi-line text control in Java Swing. And for the old AWT, this is the name that we use. We then have to actually allocate one. And we're going to see that there are some interesting arguments to the constructor in this case. This is a slightly simpler one to understand. It takes the actual text, and we'll learn how we create that in a little bit. And we also specify the number of rows and columns. And I've played around with it, and I've learned you can leave that out. Do not confuse this with the size of the text area itself in pixels. That's a different number, I guess to some extent related to these two, that needs to be computed separately and set in set size. And we'll see that in a little bit. Now, remember the thing that we're actually going to put on the screen here is not this. It's going to be the scroll pane containing it. But for now, we're going to just simply create this. And I will show you adding the text later with the set text command. Now let's look at the data that we're going to be sending to the text area. I create an array. I'm not going to go over the syntax for creating an array constant, but later on you'll see the true application where we'll be allowing the text control to either get an array like this, a matching collection of these using the Java collection mechanism, or to get a file name, and we will read in the strings to be put into the text area as well. But right now, let's just keep things relatively simple and assume we have an array of strings. So this is what we're going to create. This is actually happens to be the swing one. This is the text area. Although they do look slightly different in look and feel, they both have a scroll bar, because clearly this little space is not going to fill in those big four arrays of strings, either horizontally or vertically. Remember that, and keep in mind that this number over here is going to be the size of the text area for the scroll text area. That's going to be in a scroll bar. This number here and this number here are the dimensions of the scroll pane. Just the familiar syntax. Unfortunately, the text area itself, as defined by the wonderful folks who brought us Java, doesn't want a array or collection or file or any of those things. It just wants one big string containing carriage returns. So we have to glom them together. So this is the syntax to use a string buffer to glom or concatenate a whole bunch of strings together into one. And we put a carriage return between each one. And then we convert that to a string from the string buffer and pass it into the two text areas. We saw the other one we did in the constructor. This one I chose to use this method. This, of course, allows you to change the contents of the text area once it's already on the screen. I have no occasion to use it in this application, but there's a whole editing toolkit that this supports. I kind of wish I have another program, a Supreme Court program, where people write opinions, and I kind of wish we used that rather than the text control provided by another company in the Microsoft world. And this is when I was developing this, I discovered an annoying problem. That is, when I scrolled all the way down here, there was this annoying space right over here. So take a few seconds, and what do I have to do to this code so I don't have this annoying space here? You guessed it. I don't need a carriage return after the last string. So I have to put this little logic here, so I only append the character at the between the strings and not at the end. So if otherwise I get this stupid extra space here. Just a reminder of that. By the way, I should say there was another way to do it, and you might be wondering, why don't I just concatenate the strings? After all, we do have this method here. The problem is every time we do this, we reallocate B. And it turns out that the size of this is proportional to the square of the strings, or the square of the number of characters in the string in the string being created. And if you use a string buffer, it's simply proportional to the number of characters. Probably for the number of characters that we were playing with here, like the contents of a small participation agreement, it probably wouldn't matter. But I'm a computer scientist. I don't like using one of these if I can get rid of that number. So here we are, just reminding you, we've created this string. We've done this to put the contents of the string here. Notice we probably could have left these two things out. I've played with it, and the computer would have done this. But remember, we also, not only do we have to compute the maximum number of characters in the string, we also have to compute its length. So remember that with an array of strings, this is what was known as a ragged array in the days of C back in the 70s. We have a set of pointers to different size strings. And if this was the strings that we were actually going to display, we have 5 rows, and the maximum line length actually just happens to be 5 as well, this string over here. Now it turns out that what I call measuring the strings takes quite a bit of syntax. Now obviously the size to display in pixels is going to depend what font you're using. If I change this 12 to a 24, obviously the strings are going to be wider. Also keep in mind that most fonts are what are called proportionally spaced. There's less space for the I than the capital A. Not in this font. This is a Courier font or a monospace font. So that we're displaying here. So if I actually had new Courier here, I could just simply get the size of the string by taking the number of characters and multiplying it by the size of a single character. If I use a font such as this one, or Helvetica, or Times Roman, or any other one of the rather bizarre fonts in your Microsoft that are available to you, you can get a list by just bringing up something like Microsoft Word and going to the place where you change the font, and you get a list of enough fonts to go from the 4th floor to the basement. You do that here. You then create this special class here, over here. And it turns out that unfortunately the font that you use is dependent on F. And I have had some problems if I run this off of the frame. You may need to run it off of the text box itself. Sometimes it seems to work no matter which control you use. Sometimes it seems to give me problems. So at this point I have what's called the font metrics, and it has commands to measure the font. You'll also observe that I have one of these. This represents the area on which you would be displaying stuff. In other words, if you were actually doing a paint method, this is what you actually would be drawing lines on and circles on, etc. But we're going to use that a little bit as we measure the text. So just reviewing what we have here. And then this is presumably going to be in a loop over all the characters. And notice that when I measure the string, I pass it not only the string, not only something representing the font, but the place on which we're going to display it. I guess one thing to keep in mind is if you have a computer with several different graphics displays, the place on the length of the string in pixels might vary depending on which graphics display you happen to have your text box in. At that point, you get back a rectangle. This basically will give you a height and a width, as well as the X and Y, as well as potentially an X and Y location, but we don't, obviously not going to use that here. And then the width actually comes back as a decimal number, so we convert it to an integer. And this is going to be an array, so we just do our standard thingamajiggy to take the maximum of an array. So now we have to get the height. You're going to be using code such as this, and it is going to be easier because each line of text takes exactly the same space. It is simply a function of what font we are using. So we're going to take the number of lines, which we'll be using in this variable, and we'll need some command such as this to find out how many lines are in that which we are to display. And we're going to be multiplying it by the height of text in this particular font. By comparison, if we're using the AWTE text area, things are simple. We just simply give it the text box whatever size we would like it to appear on the window, like we would do with a button or simple text field as before. So let's just take a look at what we're going to see. This number here will be the size of the text area. This is the text area. This happens to be the one that's done with a J text area and a J scroll pane. By the way, these two numbers will become the size of the scroll pane over here. In each case, the text that we need to display with all those 4 long lines is clearly not going to fit in the small space that we are allotted, so we're going to end up with scroll bars for each of them. I happen to have used the option where the system will only display scroll bars when there's actually scrolling that's needed. If the text was small enough to fit in the assigned area, either in terms of its width or height, we would not have those scroll bars. That's the height, and that is the width. Nothing abnormal here. So this is routine. Again, we set the location onto the text area, and when we're doing the Java Swing version, we'll be doing that to the scroll pane rather than the text box. Again, we're going to add the text area directly to the frame. Now, as I discussed before and alluded to, when you do this, you got to stick it into one of these to actually do the scrolling, because you don't get it for free like you do with a plain old TEXTAREA. Now, one way of doing that is just in the constructor, sticking the item to be scrolled, that's this, inside of this. And you've seen it probably also when you declared a new print writer, putting the file in there or something like that. I've actually discovered it actually works a little bit better if you do everything explicitly. So here we are, we create this. Notice there are no arguments. We give it a size and a location. That corresponds to what we did with TA, the plain old text area. That's the size that we're going to put on the screen. But inside every one of these, and you should look at the API documentation for this class, you'll discover there's one of these. This is actually what contains the control. It could be anything, a button, a picture, whatever, that is going to be scrolled. That is bigger than the size that we're given here, or at least could be bigger. And we get it here. You've probably seen this before. And then we simply stick the text area onto that. I haven't tried adding more than one control to the J viewpoint. Just reviewing, we saw this. This is just the same standard thing that we do with every control. We tell it what size it is. Remember, this is the size that it appears on the screen, not the size of all the text that would that we don't care to allot enough space for, or can't even do it physically. This number here basically are these sizes, what the user sees. And we also have to give it a location, just like any other control, the position of that point relative to the whole window. I also discovered, and I'm not sure why this is the case, that we have to explicitly give the color for the foreground. Otherwise, it just didn't show up. I don't know why. I haven't had to do that with anything else. Anything else that I've been doing there. And we also have to explicitly set the font. Now and then we have to stick, and what do we stick? Not the text area, the scroll pane. This is what actually appears on the screen. So we observe that there are two ways to get our large piece of text onto the screen for the user to see and scroll through. One is using just an old-fashioned text area, and in that case, you don't have to do anything fancy for the scrolling. You'll get that if the text area sees that there's too much text to fit in its size. In the case of the JText area, you're using the swing stuff. You have a little more code because you have to drop the actual text thing inside of the scrolling thing and add the scrolling thing to the window for the user to see as well. Generally, I think you're going to end up with the same effect either way. The next PowerPoint in the series will explain how we make this a little more general and create a class that we can use in a bunch of different places. Also, we would like to have the text area move around as the user resizes the screen.